At my father's 70th birthday party, my brother raised his wine glass and announced that I needed to pack my bags because my free ride was finally over. The entire room fell dead silent while his new stepmother smiled. I did not argue or cry. I simply walked out to the cold porch and dialed the single number I had been preparing for months. When the line connected, I told them it was time because my family had just destroyed themselves. My name is Reagan Fox. If you had asked me 3 years ago who I was, I would have handed you a business card with a sleek, minimalist logo that read, Senior User Experience Designer at Brightside Pixel Lab. I would have told you about my loft in downtown Austin, my stock options, and the life I was building in a city that pulsed with neon and ambition. I was 33 years old then, and I felt like I had the world in a stranglehold. But standing here tonight, in the sprawling living room of a house that smells of old pine and expensive desperation, none of that matters. To the people in this room, specifically the ones who share my DNA, I am nobody. I am the spinster daughter who failed to launch. I am the help. The house itself is a character in this tragedy. It sits heavily on the prime shoreline of Lakeside Ridge, Michigan. It is a beast of a structure, all dark wood and stone, built in the 1920s by my mother's grandfather. It was never just a house. It was a statement. It was inherited wealth and summer breezes and the sound of water lapping against a private dock. Since my mother passed away, however, it has transformed. It is no longer a home. It is an asset. It is a line item on a ledger that my brother, Blake, has been itching to liquidate since the day we buried Mom. I watched my father, Leonard Fox, sitting in his favorite leather armchair near the fireplace. Tonight was his 70th birthday. He looked smaller than I remembered, shrinking inside his tweed jacket. Dad used to be a force of nature, a professor of economics who could silence a lecture hall with a single raised eyebrow. Now, after the open-heart surgery last winter and the slow creep of frailty that followed, he was soft. His eyes were a little too watery, his smile a little too vague. He was holding a glass of sparkling cider because his medication did not mix with champagne. And he looked around the room with a confused sort of gratitude, as if he was surprised so many people still knew he existed. The room was filled with the ghosts of his past and the sharks of his present. There were former colleagues from the university, neighbors who had lived next to us for 40 years, and friends he had not seen since the funeral. They were good people, mostly. They ate the catering I had spent 2 days organizing and drank the wine I had selected. But the air was thick with something else, a tension that hummed just beneath the clinking of silverware and polite laughter. My brother, Blake Fox, was holding court near the wet bar. Blake is 41 years old, and if you asked him, he would tell you he is the glue holding this family together. He is a director of investments at Ironcrest Capital, a firm that sounds important and likely manages money for people who view empathy as a weakness. Blake wears suits that cost more than my first car, and he has a way of looking at everything, including people, as if he is assessing their resale value. He was laughing loudly at a joke someone made, but his eyes were not smiling. They were darting around the room, checking the exits, checking the guests, checking the clock. Then there was Jenna, my sister. She is 38 and works as a pharmacist at Northline Pharmacy over in Ohio. She had driven in for the weekend, complaining about the traffic for 3 hours straight. Jenna is not evil, but she is weak. She has spent her entire life drafting behind Blake, letting him break the wind and make the decisions so she never has to take the blame for anything. She stood near the window, swirling her Chardonnay, avoiding my gaze. She knew something was coming. I could see it in the way she kept chewing on her lower lip. And finally, there was Sabrina. Sabrina Hale is 45 years old, making her closer in age to my brother than to my father. She was beautiful in a sharp, manicured way, wearing a dress that was perhaps a shade too tight for a 70th birthday party. She had been Dad's physical therapist at Cedarview Rehab after his surgery. That was how they met. She had been so kind then, so attentive. She had listened to his stories about economic theory when no one else would. Now, she was his wife of 6 months, She moved through the room with the grace of a predator in a tank of goldfish, touching people's arms, laughing throatily, playing the role of the devoted young wife to perfection. But whenever her eyes landed on me, the mask slipped just a fraction. There was no warmth there, only cold, hard calculation. I stood by the kitchen island, refilling a tray of hors d'oeuvres. I had been living here for 3 years. I had quit my job at Brightside Pixel Lab, gave up my apartment in Austin, and moved back to Michigan when Mom got sick. After she died, Dad fell apart, and I stayed. I cooked, I cleaned, I managed his pills. I drove him to every doctor's appointment. I was the one who held his hand when the post-surgery delirium set in. I was the one who fixed the leaky roof because Blake was too busy closing deals and Jenna was too busy with her kids. I did it because I loved him. I did it because it was the right thing to do. But to them, I was just squatting. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 times. The chatter in the room began to die down as Blake stepped into the center of the living room. He held up a crystal flute of champagne, tapping it gently with a silver spoon. The sound cut through the remaining conversations like a knife. "Attention, everyone!" Blake boomed, his voice practiced and projecting to the back of the room. "If I could have a moment of your time." Sabrina glided to his side, slipping her arm through his. It was a gesture of solidarity that looked intimate, almost too intimate for a stepmother and stepson, but I pushed the thought away. Dad looked up at them, smiling his vague, trusting smile. "We are all here to celebrate Leonard," Blake began, nodding at Dad. 70 years, that is a milestone, a lifetime of achievement, of teaching, of raising a family. There was a ripple of polite applause. Blake let it wash over him before holding up a hand for silence. His face grew serious, the expression of a man about to deliver hard truths for the greater good. "But with age comes change," Blake said, his voice dropping an octave to sound somber. "We all love Dad. We love him enough to admit when things are getting too difficult. Over the last few months, Sabrina and I have had many long, hard discussions about what is best for Leonard's future. His health is fragile. This house." He gestured vaguely at the high, beamed ceilings. "This house is too much. It is a danger. Really. Stairs, maintenance, the isolation out here by the lake. It is not safe for a man in his condition." I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. I had not been part of any of these discussions. I looked at Dad. He was frowning slightly, looking from Blake to Sabrina, as if trying to follow a lecture that had suddenly switched languages. "We have decided," Blake continued, "that it is time for Dad to move to a place where he can get the 24-hour professional care he deserves. We have secured a suite for him at Silver Lake Manor." A gasp went through the room. Silver Lake Manor was a high-end nursing facility. Yes, but it was also a place people went to wait for the end. Dad did not need a nursing home. He needed physical therapy and a diet plan, both of which I was providing. "No," I said. It came out as a whisper, but in the silence, it carried. Blake ignored me. He did not even turn his head. "To finance this move, and to ensure Dad has the absolute best care for the rest of his life, we will be listing this property for sale starting next week." Dad started to push himself up from his chair. "Now, hold on a minute, son," he stammered. I did not agree to that." Sabrina was on him instantly, her hand gently pushing him back down into the leather. "Oh, Leo, sweetie, do not get agitated. Remember what the doctor said about your blood pressure. We are doing this for you. You know you get confused. You know you cannot manage here anymore." "I manage fine," Dad said, but his voice was weak, shaking with sudden anxiety. "Reagan is here. Reagan helps me." That was the cue. Blake finally turned his body toward me. The room followed his gaze. I stood there by the kitchen island, holding a tray of stuffed mushrooms, feeling the blood drain from my face. Blake looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust that he had perfected over 4 decades. "Reagan," Blake said, his tone patronizingly sweet. "We appreciate what you have tried to do. We really do. But let us be honest. You are not a nurse. You are a graphic designer who has been out of work for 3 years. You are drifting. And quite frankly, you are enabling Dad to stay in a situation that is dangerous for him because it is convenient for you. Convenient? I asked, my voice trembling with a rage I could barely suppress. I gave up my life to be here. Blake, I take care of him every single day while you are playing Wolf of Wall Street and Jenna is pretending she does not have a father. You are living rent-free in a $1 million mansion, Blake shot back, his voice hardening. The facade of the benevolent sun was dropping. You are living off Dad's pension and eating his food. You are not a caretaker. Reagan, you are a leech. The room was dead silent. The neighbors were staring at their shoes. The old professors were polishing their glasses. No one wanted to witness an execution. That ends tonight, Blake declared. The house is being prepped for sale. Dad is going to Silver Lake, and you need to figure out your own life. He took a step closer to me, bridging the gap between the living room and the kitchen. He wanted to make sure I heard him. He wanted to make sure everyone heard him. He leaned in, his expensive cologne filling my nose, cloying and sharp. Pack your bags. Loser, he said, loud enough for the back row to hear. Your free ride is over. For a second, I thought I might slap him. My hand twitched at my side. I looked at Jenna, begging her silently to step in, to say something. She looked down at her wine glass, swirling the golden liquid faster and faster. I looked at Dad. He looked terrified, his eyes wide and helpless, trapped under Sabrina's soothing hand on his shoulder. He wanted to speak, but he was confused, overwhelmed by the sudden ambush. Blake smirked. He thought he had won. He thought this was the checkmate moment where the little sister cries and runs away, and the big brother takes control of the assets like a good patriarch. He saw a 33-year-old failure standing in a kitchen she did not own. He had no idea who he was looking at. I did not scream. I did not throw the tray of mushrooms at his head. Tempting as that was, I did not beg. I carefully placed the tray down on the granite countertop. The ceramic clink was the only sound in the room. I straightened my back. I looked Blake dead in the eye. I looked at Sabrina, who was smirking behind her hand. Okay, I said. The word hung there. Blake blinked, expecting a fight he could crush. My compliance threw him off for a microsecond. I turned around and walked past him. I walked through the living room, threading my way through the crowd of silent guests. I could feel their eyes on me, pitying, judging, relieved it was not them. I walked past the fireplace where my mother's portrait used to hang before Sabrina took it down. I walked to the heavy oak front door. I stepped out onto the porch. The night air coming off the lake was biting. A sharp Michigan chill that seeped right through my thin cardigan. It was dark out here, save for the yellow glow of the porch light. The sound of the water hitting the break wall was rhythmic, steady, ancient. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, not from cold, but from adrenaline. I unlocked the screen. There was only one number in my recent call history that mattered. I had saved it months ago, hoping I would never have to use it, but preparing for the day I might. I pressed call. It rang once, twice. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and expecting me. This is Ethan, the voice said. I looked back through the bay window. I could see Blake accepting a handshake from a man I recognized as a real estate agent. I saw Sabrina toasting with champagne. They looked like they were standing on top of the world. They looked like they had just buried their enemies. It is time, I said into the phone, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. They just announced the sale in front of 40 witnesses. They just declared Dad incompetent and tried to evict me. There was a pause on the other end, then the sound of a car door closing. We are 5 minutes away, Ethan said. Hold the line. I lowered the phone but did not hang up. I watched my family inside the warm, golden light of the house my mother loved. They thought they were stripping me of everything. They thought they were cutting off the dead weight. They had no idea they had just dug their own graves. To understand the weight of the phone in my hand and the ice in my veins as I stood on that porch, you have to rewind the tape. You have to go back 3 years to a version of me that still believed hard work and loyalty were currencies that bought you respect. Back then, I was living in Austin, Texas. I had a corner desk at Brightside Pixel Lab, a boutique creative agency where the coffee was artisanal and the deadlines were lethal. I was a senior UX designer, and I was good at it. I spent my days mapping out human behavior, predicting where an eye would track on a screen, figuring out how to make people click where we wanted them to click. I was making six figures. I had a portfolio that was getting me headhunted by major tech firms in the Bay Area. My life was a straight arrow pointing up. Then came the call about Mom. It was ovarian cancer, stage 4. By the time they found it, it was everywhere. I did not think twice. I did not ask for a leave of absence. I quit. I packed my apartment into a storage unit, broke my lease, and drove 20 hours straight back to Lakeside Ridge. I traded my ergonomic office chair for a plastic stool next to a hospital bed set up in the living room. I traded wireframes and user flows for morphine charts and palliative care schedules. For 4 months, I was the one who learned how to change a catheter. I was the one who crushed pills into applesauce when she could no longer swallow. I was the one who sat up with her at 3 in the morning when the pain was too jagged for sleep, holding her hand while she whispered regrets and memories into the dark. Blake came home twice. The first time was for a weekend. 3 weeks after I arrived, he flew in, rented a luxury sedan because he claimed the rental agency did not have anything else, and spent the entire time on conference calls in the backyard. He poked his head into the sick room, told Mom she looked like a fighter, and then asked me if I was keeping track of the grocery receipts for reimbursement from the estate later. The second time was for the funeral. Jenna was not much better. She worked at Northline Pharmacy, so she claimed she could not get away because of the flu season rush, or inventory, or a staffing crisis. She sent flowers. She sent long, emotional text messages with praying hands emojis, but she did not send herself. When Mom finally let go, the house felt like a tomb. The silence was heavy, pressing against the windows. But the person who broke the hardest was not me. It was Dad. Leonard Fox had been married to my mother for 42 years, without her. He was a ship with a snapped rudder. He stopped eating. He stopped shaving. He would sit in his study for hours, staring at a book he never turned the page of. I watched a brilliant man, a professor who had taught macroeconomics to thousands of students, forget how to make coffee. That was when the decision was made, not by a family council, but by necessity. Blake flew back to his investment firm 2 days after the burial. Jenna drove back to Ohio the morning after the wake. They stood in the driveway, luggage packed, looking at me with a mixture of relief and expectation. "Someone needs to stay with him," Blake had said, checking his watch. "Just until he gets back on his feet. You do not have a job to get back to right now anyway. Right, Reagan? It makes sense for you to hold down the fort." "Right," Jenna had echoed, buckling her kids into the car. "You are the creative one. You can freelance or whatever it is you do. We have rigid schedules." So I stayed, not because I had nothing to do, but because I could not leave him. The weeks turned into months. The months turned into a year, then 2, then 3. My life shrank down to the perimeter of the property. I became the housekeeper, the cook, the groundskeeper, and the companion. I managed Dad's blood pressure medication. I drove him to the cardiologist. I navigated the labyrinth of insurance claims. I learned how to cook low-sodium meals that actually tasted like food so he would eat them. I fixed the rotting boards on the deck myself because hiring a contractor was too expensive, and Blake refused to authorize the funds from Dad's account, claiming we needed to be liquid. And that was when the narrative shifted. To Blake and Jenna, my presence in the house stopped being a favor and started being a character flaw. I remember a visit from Blake about 8 months after Mom died. He walked into the kitchen while I was scrubbing the grout on the floor, hands and knees, hair tied back in a messy bun, wearing an old oversized t-shirt. He looked at me with that specific brand of sneer he reserved for waitstaff who messed up his order. "Still here, huh?" he said, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge without asking. "Dad had a dizzy spell yesterday," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Dr. Evans wants to monitor his dosage." Blake leaned against the counter, looking immaculate in a cashmere sweater. "You know, Reagan, It is getting a little sad. You are 30-something years old. You are living in your parents' house. You are basically a glorified squatter. I am taking care of our father, I snapped, tossing the scrub brush into the bucket. You are hiding, he corrected. You are using Dad as an excuse to avoid the real world. No rent, no mortgage, free food. Must be nice. A real free ride. That phrase, free ride, it became his favorite weapon. Jenna was more passive-aggressive. She would call and ask, "So, are you looking for work? Like, real work? I just worry about your resume gap. It does not look good to employers if you just sit around for years." They saw the roof over my head, but they did not see the cost. They did not see the nights I spent awake listening for Dad's breathing. They did not see the isolation, and they certainly did not know about the money. They assumed I was broke. They assumed I was draining Dad's pension to buy my toothpaste. They were wrong. I had never stopped working. I just stopped going to an office. About 6 months after I moved back, I reconnected with a former colleague who had moved to a tech startup called Nova Rail Systems. They needed a lead UI designer for their logistics platform, but they were fully remote. I took the contract. I worked at night. When Dad went to bed at 9 in the evening, I would go to my small bedroom, open my laptop, and work until 3 in the morning. I was pulling in $45 an hour, then 50, then 60. I lived like a monk. I had no rent, true, but I paid for all the groceries. I paid for the utilities when the bills came and Dad's account was low. I paid for the new water heater when it burst last winter. I saved everything else. I threw it into high-yield index funds and aggressive growth stocks. Ironically, the kind of thing Blake did for a living. I had a nest egg that was growing quietly in the dark, over $100,000 and climbing. I tried to tell them once. I mentioned to Blake that I had picked up a contract with Nova Rail. He waved his hand dismissively. "Gig work," he scoffed. "Pocket change. Do not pretend that is a career. Reagan, it is cute, but it is not real money." I shut my mouth. I learned then that my brother did not want the truth. He wanted a punching bag. He needed me to be the loser so he could feel like the winner. If I was successful, it disrupted his worldview where he was the savior and I was the charity case. So I let him believe it. I let him think I was scraping by. The only person who saw the truth was Uncle Mark. Mark was Dad's younger brother. He lived in Cleveland, which was a 3-hour drive away. But he came down once a month like clockwork. Mark was a retired mechanic, a man with grease permanently stained into his cuticles and a heart the size of Ohio. He drove a beat-up Ford truck and wore flannel because it was warm, not because it was fashionable. Mark saw everything. He saw me painting the garage door. He saw me organizing Dad's pill organizers for the week. He saw the way Dad's face lit up when I walked into the room. One afternoon, Mark found me on the back porch, crying. I had just gotten off the phone with Jenna, who had scolded me for buying organic chicken because it is a waste of Dad's resources. Mark sat down next to me and handed me a cold soda. "They do not get it, kid," he said roughly, looking out at the lake. "They think I am a leech," I wiped my eyes. "They think I am useless." "They are blind," Mark said. He took a long sip. "I see who is doing the work. I see who is keeping this place standing. Your brother? He likes the idea of being the head of the family, but he does not want to get his hands dirty. And your sister is just scared of him. You are the only one acting like a daughter." Mark's validation was the oxygen I needed to keep breathing. He became my confidant. When Blake would swoop in for a holiday dinner and spend the whole time criticizing the state of the lawn or the age of the television, Mark would catch my eye across the table and give a subtle wink. It was our secret alliance. But Mark also started noticing something darker. "Why does Blake never ask how Leo is feeling?" Mark asked me one day after Blake had left. He asked about the property tax assessment. He asked about the insurance policy on the boat. He asked about the zoning laws for the shoreline, but he never asked if his father was happy. "That is just Blake," I said, defending him out of habit. "He is business-minded." "No," Mark shook his head, his expression grim. "That is not business. That is an appraisal. He is not looking at a father. He is looking at an inventory. Despite the tension with my siblings, there was a golden period, about 2 years in. Dad stabilized. The grief over Mom softened from a sharp knife into a dull ache we could live with. We built a life. Dad and I. It was quiet, but it was good. We developed rituals. On Tuesday nights, we ordered takeout from the local Thai place because Dad loved the Pad See. On Friday nights, we would sit in the living room and listen to his old vinyl records. Jazz, mostly, Miles Davis and John Coltrane. He would tell me stories I had never heard. He talked about meeting Mom in a library in 1972. He talked about the economic crash of the 80s and how they almost lost the house. He talked about me as a baby, how I was the only one who could stay awake for hours just watching the world, observing. You were always the observer, Reagan. He told me one night, the firelight reflecting in his glasses. Blake is a hammer. He sees a nail. He hits it. Jenna flows like water, going wherever the path is easiest. But you watch. You understand things. Fat lot of good it does me, I had joked. It is your strength, he said seriously. Don't ever let them convince you that kindness is weakness. You are the strongest one of us. Those words held me together. They were the armor I wore when Blake called to scream about the heating bill being $20 higher than last year. They were the shield I raised when Jenna made snide comments about my lack of a husband or children. But looking back, I was naive. I thought that because I loved Dad, and because Dad loved me, that was enough. I thought that possession was 9/10 of the law, and because I was the one living there, the one caring for him, I had a place in this world. I did not realize that while I was building a home, Blake was building a case. The calls from Blake became less frequent but more specific. He stopped criticizing my cleaning and started asking about paperwork. Where is the deed kept, Reagan? Did Dad renew the umbrella policy on the liability insurance? Has he signed the updated medical directives yet? I answered honestly. I thought he was just being responsible. I thought he was trying to help from a distance. I did not see the trap snapping shut. I did not see that every piece of information I gave him was a coordinate he was plotting on a map that led directly to the eviction notice he delivered on his father's 70th birthday. I was the loyal soldier guarding the castle, never realizing that the general was negotiating the surrender behind my back. I was sacrificing my career, my social life, and my youth to keep Leonard Fox safe and happy. And all the while, Blake was looking at the calendar, waiting for the moment when the asset value outweighed the sentimental cost. They thought I was stagnant. They thought I was a moss growing on the side of the house. But moss is resilient. Moss survives the winter. And what they forgot about observers is that we see everything. I saw the cracks in the foundation before they did. I just didn't know I would be the one who had to bring the whole thing down to save it. It started with a pamphlet Uncle Mark left on the kitchen counter about a year after Mom died. It was a glossy trifold brochure for a group called the Lakeside Cardiac Recovery Network. Mark had been worried about Dad's isolation. He saw how my father would sit on the porch for hours, staring at the lake, not really seeing it. Mark thought a group of people who had survived similar heart surgeries might be good for him. At first, Dad refused. He was a private man, a man of books and lectures, not a man who sat in a circle and shared his feelings. But Mark was persistent, and eventually, Dad caved. He went to a Tuesday evening meeting at the community center. When he came home that night, there was color in his cheeks for the first time in months. He talked about a man named Stan who had a triple bypass, and a woman who brought homemade cookies. He seemed lighter. I was relieved. I actually exhaled for the first time in a year. I thought we were turning a corner. I thought I was getting my father back. 2 weeks later, he mentioned her name, Sabrina. She was not a patient. She was one of the facilitators, a physical therapy specialist who had worked at Cedar View Rehab for 15 years. Dad described her as kind, knowledgeable, and very interested in his theories on inflation. I met her a month later when she dropped Dad off after a meeting because his car would not start. Sabrina Hale was beautiful. There was no denying that. She was 45 but looked 10 years younger. She had honey blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, and she wore scrubs that somehow looked tailored. When she walked into our kitchen, she brought a scent of vanilla and expensive lotion with her. "You must be Reagan," she had said, extending a hand with a perfect French manicure. "Leonard talks about you constantly. The devoted daughter." Her grip was firm, her skin cool, her smile was dazzling, showing perfectly straight, white teeth. I felt instantly frumpy in my oversized sweatshirt and leggings. "Thank you for bringing him home," I said, genuinely grateful. "It is no trouble," she said, her eyes sweeping over the kitchen, taking in the granite countertops, the high-end appliances, the view of the lake through the sliding glass doors. "You have a lovely home here. Just lovely." In the beginning, I liked her. I really did. Dad was shaving again. He was buying new shirts. He was eating without me having to beg him. Sabrina started coming over for dinner, bringing casseroles or pies. She would sit and listen to Dad talk about the bond market for hours, nodding with an intensity that I found impressive. She made a point of befriending me, too. She would come into the kitchen while I was washing dishes and pick up a towel. "You work too hard. Sweetie," she would say, her voice low and sympathetic. "You are young. You should be out dating or traveling. It breaks my heart to see you tied down here." It felt like concern. It felt like she saw me. But then the pattern began to shift. The first anomaly was Blake. My brother, the man who claimed he was too busy to attend his own mother's birthday dinners because the market never sleeps, suddenly developed an interest in visiting Dad. Before Sabrina, we would be lucky to see Blake on Christmas and Thanksgiving. Suddenly, his silver BMW was pulling into the driveway every other Tuesday and Thursday. Coincidentally, those were the days Sabrina came over to help Dad with his home physical therapy exercises. I would be upstairs working on a design project for Nova Rail, and I would hear them downstairs. The laughter was too loud. The clinking of wine glasses was too frequent. One rainy Tuesday in November, I came downstairs to get a glass of water. I walked into the living room and found them standing by the fireplace. They were not touching, but the air between them was charged, thick with a kind of static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. They were standing too close. Blake was leaning in, whispering something to her, and Sabrina was looking up at him through her lashes, a small, secretive smile playing on her lips. When I stepped onto the hardwood floor, they sprang apart. It was subtle, a shifting of weight, a step back, but I saw it. "Reagan," Blake said, his voice too loud. "I did not hear you come down." "I live here, Blake," I said, clutching my empty glass. "I walk around sometimes." Sabrina smoothed her skirt. Her composure instantly recovered. "We were just discussing your father's progress," she said smoothly. "Blake is such a concerned son. It is touching, really." She looked at him with an expression that did not look like admiration for a concerned son. It looked like hunger. I brushed it off. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I had been isolated too long and was reading drama into nothing. Why would my brother, a successful investment banker with a wife at home, be interested in our father's physical therapist? It did not make sense. Then came the announcement. It was a Sunday morning in January. Dad called a family meeting. Blake drove in. Jenna dialed in on speakerphone. Dad sat at the head of the table, holding Sabrina's hand. "We have news," Dad said, beaming. "Sabrina and I were married yesterday at the courthouse." The silence in the room was absolute. "Married?" Jenna squawked over the phone. "Dad, you have known her for 6 months." "When you know," Dad said, squeezing her hand. "And frankly, it makes things easier. Sabrina can take over my care formally. She understands the medical side of things. It simplifies the insurance and the legal standing." I looked at Sabrina. She was looking down at the table, feigning modesty, but I saw the flash of the diamond on her finger. It was not huge, but it was vintage. It was my mother's engagement ring. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. "Congratulations," Blake said. He did not look surprised. In fact, he looked smug. "I think it is great. Dad, You deserve happiness, and having a professional in the house, that takes a load off everyone." He looked at me when he said it. "Takes a load off everyone," meaning me. "Yes," I managed to say, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Congratulations, Dad." After the marriage, the house changed. Sabrina moved in the next day. She brought 3 suitcases and an entire overhaul of the household dynamic. My mother's throw pillows? Gone. Replaced with beige linen. The paintings in the hallway? Swapped for generic abstract prints. The kitchen organization system I had perfected? Rearranged. "I just want to freshen things up for Leo," she told me when I asked about Mom's favorite vase disappearing. Too much clutter is bad for a recovering mind. But it was not just the furniture, it was the conversation. Sabrina began a campaign of subtle displacement. It was never overt. She never told me to leave. Instead, she weaponized concern. "Reagan, have you thought about applying to firms in Chicago?" she asked one morning over coffee. "A talent like yours, it is wasted here in the suburbs. You are withering away." "I am happy here," I said, pouring milk into my mug. "I am working remotely. I make good money." "But is it a life?" she pressed, tilting her head. "Living with your father and his new wife? It is not natural. Sweetie, you need space. We need space. Newlyweds, you know?" She let the implication hang there. I was the third wheel. I was the intruder in my own childhood home. Blake picked up the baton and ran with it. He started sending me emails with subject lines like "job opportunities in California" and "affordable apartments in Denver." Then the text started. "Reagan, we need to talk about the long-term plan. Dad's expenses are going up. We need to liquidate assets to ensure he has the best care. You need to start looking for a place. It is not fair to Dad to burden him with your living expenses. He needs that equity." I tried to argue. I sent him spreadsheets showing that I paid for all the groceries, the utilities, and the repairs. I showed him that my presence saved the estate $5,000 a month in nursing care costs. He never replied to the data. He only replied to the narrative. "You are holding him back. You are in the way." I started to feel like a ghost haunting my own life. I would walk into a room and conversation would stop. I would find brochures for assisted living facilities left open on the coffee table, not for Dad, but aimed at the idea that care was a commodity to be bought, not given. But the real turning point, the moment my sadness turned into cold, hard suspicion, happened 3 months after the wedding. I was coming home from a run. I entered through the garage side door, which opened into the laundry room adjacent to the kitchen. I was wearing my running shoes, so my footsteps were silent. Sabrina was in the kitchen. She was on the phone. I stopped, hand on the doorknob, hidden by the half-open door. No. The market is peaking right now," Sabrina was saying. Her voice was different. It was not the soft, cooing tone she used with Dad. It was sharp, businesslike, aggressive. "The comps in this neighborhood are insane. A waterfront property on this lot? We are looking at $1.2 million. Easy." I held my breath. "I know," she said, pausing to listen. "I am working on it. The old man is pliable. But the daughter is a tick. She is dug in deep. No, Blake is handling the pressure from his end. We just need to get the deed updated to include spousal rights before we list it." My heart hammered against my ribs so hard, I thought she might hear it. The old man. The daughter is a tick. Blake is handling the pressure. She was talking to someone about selling the house, and she mentioned Blake. I quietly backed out of the door. Closing it softly, I ran around to the front of the house and entered through the main door, making as much noise as possible, stomping my feet, calling out, "I am home!" When I walked into the kitchen 10 seconds later, Sabrina was chopping vegetables. Her phone was nowhere in sight. She looked up with that dazzling, empty smile. "Hey, runner," she chirped. "How was it? You look exhausted. You really push yourself too hard." I looked at her, at the perfect hair, the caring facade, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Michigan winter. I was not dealing with a stepmother who wanted privacy. I was dealing with a con artist. And my brother was not just a bystander, he was an accomplice. I called Uncle Mark that night. Mark had stopped coming over as much. He told me he felt uncomfortable. "She blocks me. Reagan," Mark told me over the phone. "Every time I say I am coming to visit, she has an excuse. Leo is tired. Leo has a doctor's appointment. They're going out. And when I do come, she never leaves the room. I can't get 5 minutes alone with my own brother." "She is isolating him," I said, the realization settling in like a stone in my stomach. "She is gatekeeping," Mark corrected, "and she is good at it. Last time I was there, she asked me 3 times if I knew where Leo kept the safe deposit box key. Why does a physical therapist need a safe deposit box key?" "She is talking about selling the house, Mark," I whispered, huddled in my closet for privacy. "I heard her on the phone. She mentioned Blake. They are working together." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "We need to be careful, kid," Mark said finally. "If they are working together, that means they have the financial power and the proximity. You are just one person in the house. If you make a move and miss, they will kick you out before you can blink." "I know," I said. I feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop." "Just watch," Mark advised. "Do not confront. Watch. Keep a log. If she is a shark, sooner or later she is going to bite, and when she does, we need to be ready to bleed her." The atmosphere in the house curdled. It became a place of shadows and whispers. Dad seemed to be fading. The vibrant man who had improved after the support group was now tired all the time. He would start a sentence and forget the end of it. He would look at me and call me Margaret, my mother's name. Sabrina would sigh loudly when this happened. "Oh, Leo," she would say, patting his hand patronizingly. "Your memory is getting so bad. Maybe Blake is right. Maybe you need more professional help than I can give." It was gaslighting on an industrial scale. She was creating the problem she claimed to be solving. I started noticing the paperwork, too. It was always lying around casually. A durable power of attorney form on the breakfast table. A living will draft on the nightstand. "Just standard updates," Sabrina would say if I glanced at them. "For his file?" But I saw Dad's signature on one of them. It looked shaky. It looked like the signature of a man who was too tired to read the fine print. I felt like I was living in a nightmare where I was screaming but no sound was coming out. I was the daughter, yet I had no power. I was the caretaker, yet I was being painted as the burden. One evening, I walked past the study. The door was ajar. Blake was there. Another surprise visit. He and Sabrina were looking at a laptop screen. "If we structure the trust transfer correctly," Blake was saying, his voice low, "we can bypass the probate entirely, but we need him to sign the quitclaim deed first." "He will sign," Sabrina said. Her voice was cold, devoid of any of the warmth she showed Dad. "I will make sure he is in the right mood for it." I stood in the hallway, clutching the banister. Quitclaim deed. They were not just selling the house. They were trying to transfer the title out of his name before he even knew what was happening. I realized then that my brother and his mistress, because that is clearly what she was, did not just want the money. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to erase Dad's legacy. They wanted to strip the carcass of this family clean and leave nothing but bones. I went to my room and locked the door. I did not cry. I was done crying. I opened my laptop and pulled up the contact information Mark had sent me for a lawyer in Detroit. I was not a daughter anymore. I was a witness, and I was going to burn their whole plan to the ground. The decline was not a slope. It was a cliff. For months, my father had been recovering. He was reading the Wall Street Journal again, arguing with the television pundits, and beating me at chess. Then, almost overnight, the lights went out behind his eyes. He started sleeping until noon. When he did wake up, he would sit in his leather armchair by the window, staring at the lake with a mouth slightly open, drooling onto his collar. The sharp, witty professor who could quote Keynesian economic theory from memory was replaced by a man who could not remember if he had eaten breakfast. The worst moment came on a Tuesday afternoon. I walked into the living room with a fresh cup of tea for him. He looked up, his eyes milky and confused, and smiled politely. "Thank you, nurse," he said. "Is visiting hours over yet? My daughter, Reagan, she usually comes by around 4. I froze, the ceramic mug burning my fingers. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling. "It is me. It is Reagan." He blinked, the recognition struggling to swim through a thick gray fog. "Oh," he murmured, looking back at the window. "Right, of course. Sorry, dear, just tired." Sabrina was sitting on the sofa, flipping through a magazine. She did not even look up. "It is the vascular dementia," she said, her tone breezy and clinical. "I saw it all the time at Cedarview. It progresses like this. One day they are fine. The next day the pathways just close up. It is sad. But it is normal for his age and condition." "He is 69, I snapped, "not 90, and Dr. Evans said his cognitive function was excellent at the last checkup." Sabrina closed her magazine with a sigh, giving me that pitying look she reserved for stubborn children. "Stress accelerates it, Reagan, and the heart surgery puts a strain on the brain's oxygen supply. You need to accept that the Leonard you knew is fading. Denial does not help him." She sounded so reasonable. She sounded like the expert, but my gut was screaming. I knew Dad's medication regimen better than I knew my own Social Security number. I had been managing it for 3 years. Metoprolol for the blood pressure, atorvastatin for the cholesterol, a blood thinner, and a mild diuretic. None of them listed catatonic fugue state as a side effect. I started watching the pill bottles. Dad's medication was kept in a dedicated cabinet in the kitchen. Sabrina had taken over the dispensing duties shortly after the wedding, claiming it was her wifely privilege and professional expertise. "You have done enough, sweetie," she had told me, taking the organizer from my hands. "Let me handle the medical stuff. You just be the daughter." I began finding excuses to be in the kitchen when she was prepping his evening dose. I would wash dishes or wipe down counters, watching her out of the corner of my eye. She was always careful, always shielding the bottles with her body. But criminals, even careful ones, eventually get comfortable. It was a Thursday, late afternoon. The sun was setting, casting long, orange shadows across the kitchen floor. I was in the pantry, organizing the dry goods, or pretending to. The pantry door was slightly ajar, giving me a sliver of a view of the island counter. Sabrina walked in. She was humming a tune, something light and happy. She opened the cabinet and pulled out the familiar orange prescription bottles. She lined them up. 1, 2, 3. Then, she reached into the deep pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a 4th bottle. This one was different. It was white, generic, with no pharmacy label stuck to the side. It looked like a bottle for over-the-counter vitamins, or maybe sleep aids. I stopped breathing. I pressed my eye to the crack in the door. She opened Dad's blood pressure medication bottle, the metoprolol. Then she opened the white, unlabeled bottle. With a quick, practiced motion, she tipped 3 small, pale blue pills from the white bottle into her palm, then dropped them into the little plastic cup she used for Dad. She quickly capped the blood pressure bottle without taking anything out of it. She was swapping them. She was not giving him his heart medication, or maybe she was mixing it. But whatever those blue pills were, Dr. Evans had not prescribed them. She picked up the cup and the glass of water, turned, and walked out of the kitchen toward the living room, still humming. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I waited 10 seconds, 20, until I heard the television volume go up in the other room. I slipped out of the pantry. My hands were shaking, but my mind was cold and sharp. The white bottle was gone. She must have put it back in her pocket. But on the counter, she had left the orange metoprolol bottle sitting out, likely intending to put it away when she came back for a refill of water. I grabbed the bottle. I twisted the cap off. Inside were the standard white, circular pills I recognized, but resting right on top, missed in her haste or maybe stuck to the rim, was one lone, pale blue pill. It was distinct, oval-shaped, scored down the middle, with a tiny alphanumeric code stamped on one side. I did not think. I tipped the bottle, letting the blue pill fall into my palm. Then I grabbed a Ziploc bag from the drawer, dropped the pill inside, and shoved it deep into the pocket of my jeans. I screwed the cap back on the bottle and placed it exactly where she had left it. I ran upstairs to my room, locked the door, and sat on the floor with my back against the wood. I pulled out the baggie. The little blue pill looked innocent. It looked like candy. I grabbed my laptop. I pulled up the patient portal for Dad's cardiologist. I had the login saved because I had set up the account years ago. I scanned the current medication list. Metoprolol, atorvastatin, warfarin, Lasix. I Googled descriptions of each pill: white round, white oval, pinkish round, white discoid. None of them were pale blue ovals. I typed the code stamped on the blue pill into a pill identifier database. The search bar spun for a second, then spat out a result. Alprazolam, 2 milligrams, benzodiazepine, sedative, hypnotic. Xanax, a high dose. I stared at the screen. She was feeding a man with a recovering heart heavy sedatives. No wonder he was sleeping until noon. No wonder he was confused. She was chemically inducing a fog. Why? The answer came to me in a flash of nausea. Control. If he was asleep, he could not argue. If he was confused, he could not read legal documents. If he looked senile, no one would believe him if he said he did not want to sell the house. I grabbed my phone. I needed a witness. I needed sanity. I dialed Uncle Mark. He picked up on the second ring. "Reagan, everything okay?" "No," I whispered, pulling my knees to my chest. "Mark, you have to listen to me, and you cannot freak out." "What is it?" His voice instantly dropped into a protective growl. "I think they are drugging him." Silence. Then, "Who?" "Sabrina. I saw her switching his pills in the kitchen. She put something from an unlabeled bottle into his cup. I managed to steal one that she left behind. I looked it up. Mark, it is Xanax, a heavy dose. That is why he is a zombie. It is not dementia. He is stoned." "My God," Mark breathed. "Are you sure?" "I am holding the pill in my hand," I said. "It explains everything. The sleeping, the slurring. Mark, they are trying to make him look incompetent." "Why would they—" "The house." Mark cut himself off, realizing it at the same time I did. If he is incompetent, the power of attorney kicks in. If he is incapacitated, they can take control of the assets. "Exactly," I said. "They are manufacturing a decline." "You need to call the police," Mark said. "Right now." "No," I said. "Not yet. If I call the cops now, Sabrina will flush the pills. She will say I planted it. She will say I am the jealous stepdaughter trying to frame her. She is a healthcare professional. Mark, her word against mine? They will believe the nurse over the unemployed artist. So what do? "We build a case," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "You helped your friend with that fraud case last year. What did the lawyer say?" "Documentation," Mark said. "If it is not written down, it did not happen. You need dates, times, symptoms. You need a pattern." "Okay," I said. "I can do that." "Be careful, Reagan," Mark warned. "If she is drugging him, she is dangerous. Do not let her know you know." I hung up and opened a new spreadsheet on my secure cloud drive. I named it Grocery List, just in case anyone snooped. I started logging backward, using my memory and the calendar on my phone. March 12th, Dad slept until 2 in the afternoon, missed lunch, woke up asking for Mom. March 14th, Blake visited. Dad was extremely lethargic during the visit, signed 3 documents without reading them. March 16th, Dad seemed alert in the morning. Sabrina gave him vitamins at noon. By 1 o'clock, he was slurring his speech. I spent the next 2 weeks living a double life. To Sabrina and Blake, I was the defeated, moping daughter, spending my days in my room or staring sadly at the lake. In reality, I was a spy in my own home. I tracked every pill. I tracked every visit. and a horrifying pattern emerged. Blake's visits were not random. Every time Blake was scheduled to come over, usually on Tuesday or Thursday evenings, Sabrina would up the dosage at lunch. By the time Blake's silver BMW pulled into the driveway at 5, Dad would be in a pliable, smiling stupor. I watched from the top of the stairs one evening. Blake sat on the ottoman in front of Dad's chair. He had a stack of papers on his lap. "Just a few insurance updates, Dad," Blake said, his voice smooth. "Standard stuff. We need to switch the liability coverage for the boathouse." Dad blinked, his head lolling slightly to the side. "Boathouse?" he mumbled. "Do we still have the boat?" "Sure we do. Leo," Sabrina said, coming up behind him and massaging his shoulders. "Just sign right here, sweetie. It helps Blake take care of things for us." She guided his hand, literally holding his wrist, placing the pen on the line. Dad scribbled something that looked like a spider web. "Good," Blake said, snatching the paper away. "And this one? This is just confirming the beneficiary details." "Beneficiary?" Dad asked. "Is Reagan on there?" "Of course she is," Blake lied. He did not even blink. "Everyone is on there. Just sign here." My blood boiled. I wanted to run down the stairs and scream. I wanted to tear the papers out of his hands. But I heard Mark's voice in my head. "Documentation. Do not blow your cover." I waited until they went into the kitchen for wine. I crept down the stairs, silent as a shadow. The papers were stuffed into Blake's briefcase, which was sitting open on the hall table. I did not dare touch the briefcase, but next to it, on the table, was a piece of paper that must have slid out. It was a poor quality scan, probably a copy Blake had made for reference. I picked it up. It was a durable power of attorney. It granted Blake Fox full authority to manage all real estate, banking, and investment accounts in the event of Leonard Fox's incapacitation. I looked at the signature at the bottom. It was Dad's name, but the lines were shaky, jagged. It was the signature of a man who could barely hold a pen. Then I looked at the date next to the signature. It was dated 3 weeks ago. I checked my mental log. 3 weeks ago was the day Dad had fallen asleep in his soup at dinner. The day Sabrina had said he was having a bad episode. They had drugged him into a stupor, guided his hand to sign away his autonomy, and then notarized it, probably with one of Blake's cronies. This was not just family drama. This was a felony. This was systematic, predatory fraud executed by my brother and his mistress against a vulnerable old man. I slipped the paper back onto the table, exactly as I found it. I went back upstairs, my heart pounding a rhythm of war. I had the pill, I had the log, I had seen the document. I realized then that Mark and I could not do this alone. We were out of our depth. We needed a shark of our own. We needed someone who knew how to hunt monsters in expensive suits. I pulled up the search bar on my browser. I remembered a name Mark had mentioned, a lawyer in Detroit who specialized in elder law and financial abuse, a man who supposedly hated bullies. I typed in the name Ethan Cole. The website for Cole and Marrow attorneys loaded. It was stark, black and white. The slogan read, "Protecting legacies, exposing truth." I looked at the phone number on the screen. I was not just going to save the house. I was going to send my brother to prison. The drive to Detroit felt less like a road trip and more like a deployment. Uncle Mark drove his truck, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while I sat in the passenger seat clutching a plastic folder that contained the sum total of my investigation. Inside were the photos of the pills, my symptom log, the blurry scan of the power of attorney, and the single blue Xanax pill sealed in a Ziploc bag. We pulled up to a brick building in a quiet, industrial part of the city. The sign on the door was modest brass, Cole and Marrow attorneys at law. Ethan Cole did not look like the lawyers on television. He did not wear a 3-piece suit, and he did not have a team of paralegals running behind him. He was a man in his late 50s with rolled-up sleeves, a loosened tie, and eyes that looked like they had seen every variety of human greed imaginable. His office smelled of coffee and old paper. He listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting once. He looked at the photos. He read the log. He held the baggie with the blue pill up to the light. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. "So," I said, my voice tight, "am I crazy? Am I just being the jealous daughter?" Ethan set the pill down on his desk. He leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Reagan," he said, his voice gravelly and direct. "In my line of work, we call this the classic triangle. You have the vulnerable asset, your father, you have the internal gatekeeper, the new wife, and you have the external beneficiary, the son who understands finance. It is a playbook. I have seen it a dozen times." I felt a wave of nausea, but also a strange relief. I was not crazy. "The sedative is the key," Ethan continued. "They need him pliable. If he is lucid, he might ask questions. If he is asleep or confused, they can guide his hand. That power of attorney you saw? If he signed it while under the influence of a heavy benzodiazepine, it is invalid. But proving that after the fact is a nightmare, we need to prove it now." "How?" Mark asked. "If we go to the police, they will just claim it is for his anxiety." "We do not go to the police yet," Ethan said. "Police take reports. We need to build a fortress." He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him and uncapped a pen. "We need 3 things," he said, writing as he spoke. 1, we need eyes on the ground. You say you saw her switching the pills. That is hearsay. We need video. 2, we need an independent medical evaluation to prove that when he is off the drugs, he is competent. And 3, once we establish competence, we need him to sign a new set of directives that supersedes whatever trash he signed for your brother." "Video?" I asked. "You mean spy on them?" "I mean surveillance in common areas," Ethan corrected. "Living room, kitchen, hallways. Michigan is a one-party consent state for audio, and you are a resident of the home. You have a right to security in your own dwelling. Do not put them in the bedroom or bathrooms. But if she is poisoning him in the kitchen, I want it in high definition." I hesitated. The idea of putting cameras in my father's house felt dirty. It felt invasive. "Reagan," Ethan said, catching my hesitation. "Your father looked at you yesterday and thought you were a nurse because his brain was swimming in chemicals he did not ask for. Is that invasive?" I tightened my grip on the folder. "No," I said. "That is assault." "Exactly," Ethan said. "So let us stop worrying about manners and start worrying about survival." He gave me the name of a doctor, Dr. Lila Rivera. She was a geriatric specialist who did house calls for high-net-worth clients who wanted privacy. "She is independent," Ethan said. "She owes nothing to the hospital system or your brother's insurance. She will tell us the truth about your father's mind." The next 3 days were a blur of terrifying activity. We had to wait for the window. It opened on a Thursday. Sabrina had a shift at the rehab center from noon until 8 in the evening. Blake was in Chicago for a conference. As soon as Sabrina's car pulled out of the driveway, Mark pulled his truck around the back. He brought a toolbox that looked innocent enough, but inside, nestled among the wrenches and screwdrivers, were 4 high-definition miniature cameras. We worked in silence, moving fast. "Kitchen first," Mark whispered. We hid the first camera on top of the kitchen cabinets, nestled in the fake ivy that Mom had put there 20 years ago. It had a perfect view of the medication station and the island. "Living room," I directed. We placed the second one on the bookshelf. Wedged between a stack of encyclopedias and a decorative vase, it looked directly at Dad's armchair. The third went in the hallway, hidden inside the base of a lamp. The fourth went in the dining room, tucked behind a curtain rod. Mark set up the receiver in the basement storage room, a room Sabrina never entered because it was damp and full of old tools. He connected it to a secure hard drive. "Motion activated," Mark said, checking the feed on his tablet. "Audio and video. It uploads to a cloud server that only you and Ethan have the password for." We finished with an hour to spare. When we sat down in the kitchen to drink a glass of water, my hands were shaking. "We are crossing a line, Mark," I said. "They crossed it first," Mark said grimly. "We are just drawing a new one." Dr. Rivera arrived the following Tuesday. During another one of Sabrina's shifts, I had intercepted the mail that morning to make sure there were no surprise bills, and I had spent the last 24 hours ensuring Dad only drank water I poured myself. I had swapped the special cup Sabrina left out with a clean one. For the first time in weeks, Dad was awake, truly awake. I introduced Dr. Rivera as Elena, an old friend of Mark's who was passing through town. Dad, being the gentleman he was, invited her to sit on the porch for tea. "Sss. Leonard," Dr. Rivera said casually, sipping her tea. "Mark tells me you used to teach economics. I have been trying to understand this housing bubble people are talking about. What is your take?" I held my breath. If the dementia was real, this question would confuse him. He would get lost in the words. Dad adjusted his glasses. He looked at the lake, then back at Dr. Rivera. "Well," he began, his voice a little rusty but steady, "it is not a bubble in the traditional sense. Elena, it is an inventory shortage. You have institutional investors buying up single-family homes, driving up the base price, which squeezes out the entry-level buyers. It creates an artificial scarcity." I could have cried. He was there. He was still in there. "Doctor," Rivera pushed him harder. She asked him about dates. She asked him about his assets. She asked him if he knew who the president was. He answered everything. He was slow. Yes, he was physically frail. But his mind? His mind was a steel trap that had just been rusted shut by sedation. After an hour, Dr. Rivera walked into the kitchen where I was waiting. She looked furious. "He does not have advanced dementia," she said, her voice low and sharp. "He has mild age-related cognitive decline, at worst, but his pupils are dilated, and his reflexes are sluggish. He is being medicated into a stupor. Reagan, if we stop the sedatives, he is fully capable of making his own decisions." "Can you testify to that?" I asked. "I will write a sworn affidavit today," she said, "and I took a blood sample. When the toxicology comes back, you will have proof of what is in his system." That night, I sent the report to Ethan. 2 days later, a courier envelope arrived at Mark's house in Cleveland to avoid interception at my house. Mark brought it down the next morning. It contained 3 documents drafted by Ethan. The first was a revocation of prior powers of attorney. It stated that any previous authority granted to Blake Fox was null and void immediately. The second was a new durable medical and financial power of attorney, granting authority to Reagan Fox and Mark Fox as co-agents. The third was a document Ethan called the Shield. It was a notarized statement of intent. It declared Leonard Fox's explicit desire to remain in his home for the remainder of his life and required 2 signatures, mine and Mark's, for any sale, transfer, or encumbrance of the property. Now came the hardest part. We had to get Dad to sign them, and we had to do it without alerting the enemy. We chose a Wednesday morning. Sabrina was at a yoga class, her one self-care hour of the week. I made Dad a strong cup of coffee. No pills, no vitamins. Mark sat across from him at the kitchen table. The morning sun was hitting the wood, making the dust motes dance. "Dad," I said gently, "we need to talk about business." Dad looked at me over his glasses. He seemed clearer than he had been in months, likely because I had been secretly intercepting the blue pills for 2 days now. "Business?" he asked. "I thought Blake handled the business." "That is the problem, Leo," Mark said, leaning forward. "Blake is handling too much, and we are worried he is not listening to what you actually want." Dad frowned. "He talks so fast," Dad admitted softly. "He brings papers. He tells me it is for insurance. I get confused." "It is not your fault," I said, reaching out to cover his hand. "The medicine they give you makes you confused. Dad, but right now, you are not confused, are you?" "No," he said, looking at me with sudden clarity. "No, I feel awake. Why do I feel awake?" "Because we did not give you the blue pill this morning," I said. Dad stared at me. The implications sank in slowly. He was an intelligent man. He connected the dots, the sleepiness, the missing hours, the papers Blake made him sign when he could barely keep his eyes open. "He is my son," Dad whispered, his voice cracking. "Why would he do that?" "Because he wants to sell the house. Leo," Mark said gently, "and he knows you would never agree to it if you were thinking straight." Dad looked around the kitchen. He looked at the spot where Mom used to stand by the stove. He looked at the view of the lake he had worked 40 years to pay for. "I do not want to leave," Dad said. His voice was firming up. Anger was starting to burn through the fog. "This is my home. I promised Margaret I would never sell it." "Then help us protect it," I said. I slid the documents across the table. "These papers say that you are in charge. Dad, they say that Blake cannot sell anything without asking Mark and me first. They put the power back in your hands." Dad picked up the pen. His hand was trembling, not from age, but from emotion. "Read it to me," he commanded. "Every word." I read it. I read the clauses about revoking Blake's power. I read the clauses about his medical care. When I finished, Dad took a deep breath. He looked at Mark, then at me. "I trust you," he said. "I do not know what happened to my boy, but I know who is standing here with me." He pressed the pen to the paper. It was not the shaky spiderweb signature Blake had gotten. It was slow, deliberate, and heavy with intent. "Leonard J. Fox." He signed all 3 copies. We scanned them immediately and uploaded them to Ethan's secure server. We hid the originals in a fireproof bag inside the hollowed-out base of an old stereo speaker in the basement. I looked at the clock. Sabrina would be back in 20 minutes. "Put the coffee away," I said to Mark. "We need to look boring." When Sabrina walked in, flushed from yoga, she found Dad dozing in his chair, fake dozing, and me reading a book. "Did he take his meds?" she asked sharply, checking the time. "Not yet," I said, keeping my voice dull. "I was waiting for you. You know the routine better." She smiled, that predatory, satisfied smile. "Good girl. I will get them now." I watched her walk into the kitchen. I knew the camera in the ivy was recording her every move. I knew Ethan had the documents that stripped her husband of his power. She thought she was managing a decline. She had no idea she had just walked into a trap, and the best part was, she handed Dad the pills, and he took them, playing his part perfectly. The board was set, the pieces were moving, and for the first time in years, I felt like we were going to win. The footage from the hidden cameras was not just evidence. It was a horror movie playing out in high definition on a laptop screen in our damp basement. For the first few days, it was mundane. We watched Sabrina make coffee. We watched her scroll through her phone for hours while Dad sat staring at a wall. We watched her ignore him when he asked for water. Only getting up 10 minutes later during a commercial break, it was neglect, certainly, but it was hard to prove as malicious. Then came Friday night. Mark and I were huddled in the basement, the hum of the dehumidifier masking our breathing. On the screen, the kitchen was bathed in the warm glow of the under-cabinet lights. It looked cozy. It looked like home. Sabrina walked into the frame. She was wearing a silk robe, looking relaxed. She opened the cabinet and pulled out the familiar white, unlabeled bottle. She did not just swap the pills this time. She crushed them. We watched, magnified on the screen, as she used the back of a spoon to grind the blue oval into a fine powder on the granite countertop. She swept the powder into Dad's evening chocolate pudding. She stirred it in, licking a spot of chocolate off her thumb. Then, she looked up toward the ceiling, not at the camera, but just rolling her eyes in annoyance at the task. "Go to sleep, old man," she muttered. The audio was crisp, picking up the low, hateful timbre of her voice. "I am so sick of listening to you breathe." Mark made a sound in his throat like a wounded animal. He started to stand up, his fists clenched. "Sit down," I whispered, grabbing his arm. My grip was bruising. "We need more. We need the money trail." "She is poisoning my brother," Mark hissed, tears standing in his eyes. "She is sedating him," I corrected, though my own stomach was churning. "If we go upstairs now, she claims it is a supplement. She claims we broke into her privacy. We need to bury her. Mark, We need to make sure she never works near a patient again. The next piece of gold came on Saturday morning. Dad was asleep in his chair. The pudding had done its work. I was out in the garden, pretending to prune rose bushes so Sabrina would think I was occupied. Sabrina was in the living room. She was pacing. She had her phone on speaker mode, holding it like a piece of toast in front of her mouth. The camera hidden in the bookshelf, right next to the Encyclopedia Britannica, picked up everything. "He is completely out of it," Sabrina said. "I upped the dose last night. He does not even know what day it is." The voice on the other end was tinny but unmistakable. It was Blake. "Good," my brother said. "Keep him there. I do not want him having any sudden moments of clarity when I bring the notary over next week." "Next week?" Sabrina snapped. "Blake, you said today, I cannot keep this up forever. The daughter is sniffing around. She watches me like a hawk." "Relax," Blake's voice soothed. "Reagan is useless. She is too scared to do anything. Just keep him sedated. I have a buyer lined up from Harborgate Realty. The market is screaming hot right now. If we list it as a teardown on a premium lot, we can get cash in hand within 30 days. "A teardown?" Sabrina asked, pausing by the window. "I thought we were selling it as a vintage estate." "The land is worth more than the house," Blake explained, his tone dripping with the arrogance of a man playing Monopoly with real lives. "The structure is a liability. We sell the lot. We take the cash. We dump him in the nursing home. We split the proceeds. Simple." "Just get the papers here," Sabrina said. "Tell him it is for the flood insurance renewal. He signs anything if you say the word insurance." "I will be there Tuesday," Blake said. "Make sure he is prepped." The call ended. I sat back in the folding chair in the basement, staring at the frozen image of my stepmother. A teardown. They were going to demolish the house, my mother's house, the place where she taught me to paint, the place where Dad wrote his thesis. They were going to flatten it for a payout. Ethan Cole called it the smoking gun. When I sent him the clip, he emailed back one word: perfect. But Ethan pushed for more. "You have the conspiracy to defraud," he told me on a secure line. "Now prove the motive, prove the relationship. If they are just a stepson and stepmother working together, it is bad. But if they are partners, if this was premeditated before the marriage, that is a RICO case. That is organized crime." "How do I find that?" I asked. "The laptop," Ethan said. "People get lazy with their digital lives. Check the emails." I waited 4 days for the opportunity. Sabrina was careful with her technology. She usually kept her phone locked and her laptop in her bag. But criminals get cocky when they think they have won. On Wednesday morning, the rehab center called her. Someone had called in sick, and they needed an emergency shift covered. Sabrina was flustered. She was trying to put on her earrings, drink her coffee, and yell at someone on the phone all at the same time. She grabbed her bag. She grabbed her keys. She ran out the door. She left her silver MacBook sitting open on the kitchen island. I waited until her taillights disappeared down the driveway. Then I locked the front door. I walked over to the island. The screen was dim, but not asleep. I tapped the spacebar. It lit up. She was logged into her personal email account. I felt a surge of adrenaline that made my fingertips tingle. I did not have much time, maybe an hour before she realized, or before the screen locked and required a password I did not have. I went to the search bar. I typed in one word: Fox. The results populated instantly, hundreds of them. I scrolled past the recent ones, the exchanges about dinner plans, the fake pleasantries. I scrolled down, past the wedding arrangements, past the initial dating phase. I went back to the beginning. I found an email dated 18 months ago. That was 6 months before she supposedly met Dad at the cardiac support group. The subject line was, "Target profile, Lakeside Ridge." It was from Blake. I opened it. My breath caught in my throat. "Sabrina." The email read, "I found the perfect candidate. Leonard Fox, 68, widower, retired academic, lives alone in a debt-free property on the North Shore. Valuation is roughly $1.5 million. He is soft, lonely, and trusting. The daughter lives there, but she is a non-factor. No financial leverage. I can get you into the support group he attends. Work your magic. I felt sick, physically sick. It was not a romance. It was a hit job. Blake had scouted his own father like a venture capital acquisition. I clicked on the next email. Introduction. Strategy. Sabrina. He is cute in a pathetic way. I made contact today. Told him I loved his tie. He practically melted. This is going to be easier than the last one. The last one. The implication that they had done this before hung in the air like a foul smell. But then, the tone of the email shifted. I found a folder labeled Personal. I clicked on it, and the floor fell out from under me. There were photos, selfies taken in hotel mirrors, receipts for weekends away in Chicago and Traverse City, dates that coincided with holidays where Blake claimed he was working late, and Sabrina said she was at a conference. They were kissing. They were in bed together. In one photo, taken 3 months ago, after the wedding to my father, Blake was holding Sabrina around the waist, grinning at the camera. The caption read, "Almost at the finish line, baby. Just a few more signatures." They were lovers. They had been lovers for years. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the laptop through the window, but the cold, hard voice of Ethan Cole was in my head. Save everything. I plugged in a USB drive I had kept in my pocket for this exact moment. I started dragging folders. I downloaded the entire email history. I downloaded the photo stream. Then I saw something else, a notification from a banking app in the corner of the screen. I clicked on the browser history. She had recently accessed a portal for something called BF Strategic Holdings. I clicked the link. It auto-logged in because she had saved the password. It was a business account. The dashboard showed a balance of $75,000. I looked at the transaction history. Transfer from L. Fox Personal Checking. $5,000. Transfer from L. Fox Savings. $10,000. Transfer from L. Fox Emergency Fund. $8,000. It was a slow bleed. Every time she helped Dad with his banking, she was skimming off the top, siphoning thousands of dollars at a time into this shell company. And the registered agent for BF Strategic Holdings? I clicked on the profile tab. Blake Fox. They were not waiting for the house sale. They were robbing him in real time. I exported the bank statements as PDF files. I saved them to the drive. I checked the clock. 40 minutes had passed. I pulled the USB drive out. I wiped the browser history of the last hour so it would not show I had been snooping. I left the laptop exactly as it was. Open, innocent, deadly. I ran to the garage. Mark had installed a small, hidden wall safe behind a pegboard of tools. A safe Sabrina did not know existed. I put the USB drive inside. Then, because I was paranoid, I took a photo of the documents on the drive with my phone and uploaded them immediately to the encrypted cloud server Ethan had set up. I went back to the kitchen. I made myself a cup of tea. My hands were steady now. The fear was gone. The sadness was gone. The little sister who wanted approval was dead and buried. I sat at the kitchen island, staring at the spot where Sabrina crushed the pills. They thought I was the loser. They thought I was the free ride. They thought I was just a piece of furniture in the house they were going to demolish. I took a sip of tea. It tasted bitter, but I did not mind. I had the gun, I had the bullets, I had the fingerprints. When Blake stood up at that birthday party to ruin my life, he was going to be standing on a trap door, and I was going to be the one to pull the lever. The week leading up to the birthday party was a masterclass in psychological warfare, and for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the lesson plan. The atmosphere in the house had shifted from a slow, suffocating fog to something sharp and brittle. Sabrina was losing her composure. We watched it happen on the hidden camera feeds in the basement like we were watching a reality show about a woman unraveling. She was pacing the kitchen more often, snapping at Dad for spilling water, and checking her phone constantly. On Tuesday night, the camera hidden in the ivy atop the kitchen cabinets captured a moment that made my blood run cold. Sabrina was standing at the island, crushing the blue pills, but this time She was not humming. She was frantic. She poured the powder into Dad's evening tea, stirring it so hard the spoon clinked loudly against the ceramic. "If we keep waiting, the lawyers are going to sniff this out," she muttered to herself, unaware that the red light of the camera was blinking just 3 feet above her head. "This is taking too long. Everything is going to get messy if he does not stay under." She turned and shouted toward the living room, "Drink up! Leo, it is good for your throat." I sat in the basement with Mark, watching the screen. The hatred in her voice was so raw it felt like a physical blow. She was terrified. She knew that every day Dad remained alive, and technically the owner of the house was another day their plan could fall apart. She needed the sale to close. She needed the cash in the offshore account. She needed us gone. Blake, sensing the urgency, began to abandon all pretense of being a busy executive who could only spare an hour a week. He started showing up almost every evening. He would breeze through the front door with his leather briefcase and his laptop, smelling of expensive cologne and arrogance. He walked past me as if I were a piece of furniture that he had already marked for the dump. "Reagan, give us the room," he would say, not even looking me in the eye. "Dad and I have high-level financial matters to discuss. This is adult stuff. Why do you not go paint something?" In the past, I would have fought him. I would have argued that I paid the bills, that I knew the accounts better than he did. But not this week. This week, I played the role they had written for me. "Okay, Blake," I said, keeping my voice small and defeated. "I will just be in the garden." I would shuffle out, shoulders slumped, looking for all the world like a woman who had accepted her fate. But the moment I was out of sight, I would circle back to the side of the house, slipping into the laundry room or the basement to monitor the audio feeds. On Thursday, 2 days before the party, I caught the smoking gun regarding the timeline. I was standing just outside the French doors of the study. The glass was thick, but the window was cracked open an inch to let in the evening breeze. Blake and Sabrina were inside. Dad was slumped in his chair, chin on his chest, heavily sedated from the double dose Sabrina had given him at lunch. "We cannot do it privately," Blake was saying. His voice was agitated. "If we just sell the house and move him quietly, Reagan will make a scene. She will call Mark. She will try to drag it out in court claiming we bullied him." "So what is the play?" Sabrina asked. "The party," Blake said. "The birthday party on Saturday." I pressed my ear closer to the gap in the window. 70 people are coming," Blake continued. "Old colleagues, neighbors, the pillars of the community. I am going to make the announcement during the toast. I will frame it as a heroic decision. The devoted son stepping in to save his ailing father. I will announce the sale and the move to the nursing home publicly." "And Reagan?" Sabrina asked. "I will humiliate her," Blake said cold-bloodedly. "I will paint her as the leech who is holding him back. I will tell everyone she has to leave. If I do it in front of an audience, she won't be able to argue. She will be too ashamed. She will pack her bags and run. And by the time she gets her courage back, the house will be sold." My breath caught in my throat. It was not just a financial strategy. It was a public execution. He wanted to destroy my reputation and my dignity in one fell swoop so that no one would believe me when I tried to expose them. "Good," Sabrina said, sounding relieved. "I want her out. She creeps me out. She is always watching." "She has no idea." Blake laughed. "She is defeated. You should see her face when I tell her to leave the room. She is broken." I pulled back from the window, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure rage against my ribs. Broken. That is what they thought. They thought silence was submission. They had forgotten that the predator who stays quiet is usually the one about to strike. The next afternoon, the doorbell rang. Standing on the porch was a man I had never seen before, though I recognized the type immediately. He wore a suit that was a little too shiny and a smile that was a little too wide. "Miles Rowan," he introduced himself, handing me a card. "Harborgate Realty. I am a friend of Blake's." "Oh," I said, feigning ignorance. "Is Blake here?" "He is on his way," Miles said. Stepping past me into the foyer without waiting for an invitation, he asked me to do a quick walkthrough. just to get a sense of the square footage and the layout for the valuation. He did not introduce himself to me as the owner's daughter. He did not ask if it was a good time. He looked at the house like a butcher looks at a carcass, deciding where to make the cuts. I followed him as he walked through the living room. He pulled out a laser measuring tool and started zapping the walls. "Great bones," he muttered to himself. "Tear down the interior walls. Open up the floor plan. Maybe expand the deck. Yeah, this will move fast." He walked into the kitchen. Sabrina was there, chopping vegetables. They exchanged a look, a familiar, conspiratorial look. "Hey, Miles," Sabrina said. "Blake said you were coming. Do you think we can list at 1.5 million? "Easy," Miles grinned. "Maybe 1.6 if we stage it right. The market is hungry for waterfront." I stood in the doorway, invisible to them. They were discussing the sale of my childhood home, the place where my mother died, the place where I had spent 3 years keeping my father alive, as if it were already a done deal. I went to my room and locked the door. I opened my laptop and typed a quick update to Ethan Cole. "They are appraising the house today. Miles Rowan from Harborgate. They are planning to announce the listing at the party on Saturday night." Ethan's reply came back 3 minutes later. "Let them. The more they commit, the harder they fall. We are ready." I spent the rest of the day uploading files. Every video clip of Sabrina crushing pills. Every screenshot of the emails between Blake and Sabrina. The bank statements showing the transfers to BF Strategic Holdings. The spreadsheet I had kept of Dad's symptoms. I sent it all to Ethan. I sent copies to Dr. Rivera. And then, following Mark's instructions, I sent a secure link to a woman named Patricia Vance. Patricia was an investigator with the Michigan Office of Elder Protection. Mark had called in a favor from an old union buddy to get her direct line. She was looking for a high-profile case to set a precedent in the county, and thanks to my documentation, she now had one. We spoke on the phone late that night, while I sat in my car parked down the street to avoid being overheard. "Ms. Fox," Patricia said, her voice professional and stern. "I have reviewed the footage and the financial records you sent. The pattern of transfers to BF Strategic Holdings is textbook embezzlement, and the video of the medication tampering, well, that upgrades this to physical abuse and endangerment." "So you can stop them?" I asked, gripping the steering wheel. "I can do more than stop them," Patricia said. "I can arrest them. But your lawyer, Mr. Cole, suggests we wait until the party. He wants them to publicly assert their authority before we intervene. He says it solidifies the fraud charge if they attempt to exercise the invalid power of attorney in front of witnesses." "Are you sure?" I asked. "It feels risky." "I will be outside," Patricia promised. "Dr. Rivera will be with me. We will have a patrol car on standby around the corner. You just give the signal." "The signal?" We had decided on it during a conference call with Ethan. "The party is their stage," Ethan had said. "They want a show? Give them a show. Let Blake make his speech. Let him dig the hole deep. Let him say the words that prove he believes he has total control." "What words?" I had asked. "Wait for the dismissal," Ethan said. "He wants to kick you out? Wait for the eviction. The moment he tells you to leave. The moment he tells you to pack your bags. That is the breach. That is when the damage is quantifiable. That is when you walk out and call me." So that was the plan. I had to stand there and let my brother humiliate me. I had to let him strip me of my dignity in front of 70 people. I had to let him think he had won everything, just so I could take it all back. Saturday morning arrived with a gray, overcast sky. The house was buzzing with activity. Caterers were setting up in the backyard. Florists were bringing in arrangements that cost more than my monthly food budget. Sabrina was in her element. She was barking orders at the staff, looking every inch the lady of the manor. She wore a dress that was clearly new, something expensive in silk that shimmered when she moved. Blake arrived at noon. He looked tense but triumphant. He pulled me aside in the hallway. "Reagan," he said, adjusting his cufflinks, "tonight is important for Dad. I do not want any drama. I am not planning any drama." "Blake," I said, looking at the floor. "Good," he sneered. "Just stay out of the way. Keep the food trays full. Make sure Dad does not drool on anyone. And when I start the speeches, maybe make yourself scarce. You do not want to be in the spotlight for what I have to say." "I understand," I said. He clapped me on the shoulder. A heavy, patronizing thud. "You will thank me later. It is time you grew up and stood on your own 2 feet." I watched him walk away, and for the first time, I did not feel angry. I felt a cold, detached pity. He was so confident. He was walking toward a cliff edge, and he thought it was a podium. I went upstairs to my room to get ready. I put on a simple black dress. I did not put on jewelry. I did not put on makeup. I wanted to look plain. I wanted to look like the victim they needed me to be. Then I packed my bag. It was a simple canvas tote bag, beige and unremarkable, but inside, it held the weight of a nuclear bomb. I put in the external hard drive containing terabytes of video and audio evidence. I put in the thick folder of printed emails, the ones detailing the seduction plot and the target profile. I put in the bank records showing the $75,000 stolen through the shell company. And finally, I put in the original copies of the new legal documents Dad had signed, the revocation of Blake's power, the new medical directive, and the statement of intent to keep the house. I zipped the bag shut. I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw a woman who had been tired for 3 years. I saw the lines around my eyes from sleepless nights. I saw the shoulders that had carried a dying mother and a grieving father. But I also saw something else. I saw the daughter Leonard Fox had raised, the observer, the one who stayed. I picked up the bag. It felt heavy, solid. I walked downstairs. The guests were starting to arrive. The music was playing. The wine was flowing. I saw Miles Rowan laughing with Blake near the bar. I saw Sabrina holding Dad's arm, her nails digging slightly into his suit jacket. Dad looked foggy, smiling vacantly at people he should have recognized. Mark was standing in the corner, nursing a soda. He caught my eye. He nodded once, a tiny, imperceptible movement. I nodded back. I walked into the kitchen to check the hors d'oeuvres. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. "Pack your bags." That was the phrase. I just had to wait for the phrase. I took a deep breath and stepped out into the party. I was ready to be humiliated. I was ready to be the loser, because I knew exactly what was waiting for them in the dark outside. The house was vibrating with the low hum of 70 people pretending to have a good time. It was a sound I knew well, the specific frequency of polite society smoothing over cracks in the foundation. My father's 70th birthday party had transformed our home into a stage set, complete with catered roast beef, vintage wine, and a cast of characters who had no idea they were attending a funeral for their own integrity. I stood near the buffet table, refilling a platter of shrimp cocktail. I was wearing the black dress I had chosen for its invisibility. I wanted to blend into the woodwork. I wanted to be the ghost they all treated me as. The guest list was a curated mix of Dad's past and Blake's future. There were the innocent bystanders, Professor Henderson, who had shared an office with Dad for 20 years, Mrs. Gable, who had lived next door since before I was born, and a handful of cousins from Mom's side who looked uncomfortable in their stiff suits. Then there were the vultures. Miles Rowan was holding court near the fireplace. The real estate agent from Harborgate Realty looked less like a guest and more like an appraiser. I watched him tap on the mantelpiece, checking the solidity of the stone. I saw him point out the crown molding to a man I did not recognize, likely a developer he had brought along as a +1. They were carving up the carcass before the heart had even stopped beating. Jenna had arrived an hour ago with her husband, Evan. They looked frantic, their eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit. Jenna hugged me briefly when she came in, her body stiff, smelling of nervous sweat and airplane air. "He looks tired," Jenna had whispered to me, glancing at Dad. "He is drugged." I wanted to scream. Instead, I just said, "It has been a long week." Jenna did not ask more. She did not want to know more. She moved away to find a glass of white wine, shielding herself with alcohol against the reality of what was happening. And then there was Sabrina. If there was an Academy Award for Best Performance by a Sociopath in a Supporting Role, My stepmother would have swept the category. She was everywhere at once. She was filling glasses. She was laughing at bad jokes. She was touching arms and whispering confidences. I watched her work on Mrs. Gable. "Oh, it is just so hard," Sabrina said. Her voice pitched perfectly to travel just enough for sympathy, but not enough to seem loud. "We try our best, but the decline has been so rapid. Just yesterday he forgot how to use a fork. It breaks my heart to see a brilliant mind crumble like this." "Mrs. Gable patted Sabrina's hand. Her face crumpled in pity. "You are a saint. Sabrina, truly, most women would not be able to handle it." "I do it for love," Sabrina sighed, casting a tragic look toward Dad. "But I worry about his safety. This house, it is too big, too many stairs. I am terrified he will fall and break a hip when I'm not looking." It was a masterclass in narrative building. She was planting the seeds of incompetence so that when the axe fell, everyone would nod and say it was for the best. I looked at Dad. He was sitting in his leather armchair, which had been dragged to the head of the dining table. He was wearing his favorite navy suit, but it hung loosely on his frame. He looked small. Sabrina had given him a booster dose before the guests arrived. I had seen the powder go into his afternoon tea on the camera feed. He was smiling, but the smile was not attached to anything. His eyes were glassy, tracking movement sluggishly. However, I knew Dr. Rivera said the drugs came in waves, and in the troughs between the peaks of sedation, the man I knew was still there. I walked over to him to refill his water glass. I leaned in close. "Happy birthday, Dad," I whispered. He looked up. For a second, the fog cleared. His pupils contracted. He looked at me, really looked at me, with a desperation that stole the breath from my lungs. He gripped my wrist. His hand was cold, but his grip was surprisingly strong. "Reggie," he rasped, using the nickname he hadn't used since I was 12. Where is the paper?" He remembered signing the new documents with Mark and me. He was trying to ask if we were safe. "It is safe," I whispered back, pouring the water. "Just hold on. It is almost over." He nodded, a microscopic movement, and then his eyes drifted away again as Sabrina swooped in. "Oh, look at you two," she cooed, placing a hand on Dad's shoulder, effectively breaking his connection with me. "Reagan, honey, the ice bucket is empty. Why do you not run to the kitchen? We need to keep things flowing." I looked at her. I saw the triumph in her eyes. She thought she was dismissing the help. "Sure," I said. "Right away." Dinner was a blur of silver forks on china and the murmur of conversation. I did not eat. I sat at the far end of the table, next to a cousin I had not seen in 10 years, pushing peas around my plate. Blake sat at the other end, opposite Dad. He was drinking scotch. He looked like a king surveying his kingdom. He laughed too loudly. He checked his watch every 5 minutes. When the plates were cleared and the coffee was being poured, Blake stood up. He picked up a spoon and tapped it against his crystal glass. Ting, ting, ting. The room fell silent. 70 faces turned toward him. "If I could have everyone's attention," Blake boomed. He had his boardroom voice on, deep, projecting, authoritative. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, resting one hand on the table and the other in his pocket. 70 years. It is a monumental achievement. We are here to honor Leonard Fox, a father, a husband, a scholar. There was a round of polite applause. Blake waited for it to die down. "But," he said, his tone shifting to somber seriousness, "we are also here as a family that loves him, and loving someone means making hard choices. It means doing what is right, even when it is painful." I saw Jenna stiffen in her chair. She stared at her napkin. She knew what was coming. "As many of you know," Blake continued, gesturing vaguely at Dad, who was staring at a flower arrangement. "Dad's health has been declining. The dementia is aggressive. Sabrina has been a warrior, caring for him day and night, but it has become too much for one person. It has become dangerous." Sabrina wiped a fake tear from her eye. Mrs. Gable reached out to squeeze her hand. I have consulted with specialists, Blake lied. And as the person Dad entrusted with his power of attorney to make these decisions, I have decided that we can no longer keep him here, for his own safety, and for his quality of life. We will be moving Dad to Silver Lake Manor next week. A ripple of shock went through the room. Silver Lake was where people went to die. Everyone knew it. It is a top-tier facility, Blake said quickly, cutting off the murmur. But of course, top-tier care is expensive, and this house, this beautiful, sprawling house, is a hazard to him now. It is also a financial burden that the estate can no longer carry. He took a sip of his scotch, pacing the dramatic pause perfectly. Therefore, he announced, we have decided to liquidate the property. The house will go on the market on Monday. We are doing this to secure Dad's future, to make sure he is comfortable. Wait, Jenna whispered. It was so quiet I barely heard it. Blake, you said we would talk about the house later. The decision is made. Jenna, Blake said sharply, not even looking at her. It is handled. Sabrina spoke up then, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. It is the only way, she said to the room. I love this house, but I love Leo more. We have to let it go. Then, Blake turned. He rotated his body slowly until he was facing me. I was sitting 20 feet away, alone at the end of the table. The room followed his gaze. I felt the weight of 70 pairs of eyes. And that brings me to Reagan, Blake said. His voice changed. The somber concern vanished, replaced by a sneering contempt that he finally felt free to unleash. Reagan, he said, shaking his head. My little sister, you have been here for 3 years, living under Dad's roof, eating his food, using his utilities, playing pretend nurse. Blake, I said softly, stop. No, I will not stop, he said, his voice rising. We are all adults here. Let us be honest. You have been hiding here. You have been using Dad's illness as an excuse to avoid getting a real job. You have been draining his resources while Sabrina does the actual work. That is not true, I said. Standing up, my legs felt heavy, but I stood. Sit down, Blake barked. I am speaking. This family has carried you long enough. But the gravy train stops tonight. With the house being sold and Dad moving to care, your excuse for squatting here is gone. He picked up his glass and took a step toward me. Pack your bags, loser, he said. The words hung in the air, brutal and ugly. Your free ride is over. I want you out of this house by tomorrow morning. The silence that followed was deafening. It was a vacuum. I looked at the guests. Mrs. Gable looked horrified, her hand covering her mouth. Professor Henderson was frowning, looking from Blake to Dad. I looked at Jenna. She had tears in her eyes, but she looked down. She was afraid of him. She was afraid of the conflict. She said nothing. I looked at Sabrina. She was not looking at me. She was looking at Blake with a gaze of pure, unadulterated lust. She was watching him crush me, and it was turning her on. She reached under the table and I saw her hand squeeze his thigh. Finally, I looked at Dad. He was trembling. His hands were shaking in his lap. He was fighting the fog, trying to find the words. But the shock and the drugs were a heavy blanket. He looked at me with sheer panic. I took a deep breath. I could have screamed. I could have shouted that he was sleeping with his stepmother. I could have thrown the wine glass at his head. I could have told everyone about the pills and the theft. But that is what the old Reagan would have done. The emotional, reactive little sister. The new Reagan? She was a sniper, and snipers do not scream. I looked Blake dead in the eye. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable, until people started shifting in their seats. Okay, I said. It was a whisper, but in the dead silence, it carried to the back corners of the room. Blake blinked. He had expected a fight. He had expected me to cry, to beg, to make a scene that would justify his cruelty. My acceptance threw him off balance. Okay, he repeated, sneering. That is it? That is it, I said. I picked up my napkin from the table. I folded it neatly into a square. I placed it next to my plate. I turned away from him. I walked toward the archway that led to the hall. I kept my head high. I did not look at the guests who were staring at me with a mix of pity and embarrassment. I walked past Jenna, who was silently weeping. I walked past Miles Rowan, who was smirking. I walked out of the dining room, down the hallway, past the kitchen where the camera in the ivy was still recording, and to the front door. I opened the heavy oak door and stepped out onto the porch. The change in atmosphere was physical. Inside, the air was hot, stifling, thick with lies. Outside, the Michigan night was crisp and cold. The wind coming off the lake bit at my bare arms. The sound of the waves was a steady, rhythmic heartbeat. I closed the door behind me, shutting in the noise of the party. I walked to the edge of the porch steps. My tote bag was sitting there, tucked behind a planter where I had stashed it earlier. I reached into the front pocket of the bag and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. I looked back through the bay window. I could see them inside. Blake was laughing now, accepting a pat on the back from Miles. Sabrina was kissing Dad on the cheek, playing the role of the comforter. They looked so secure. They looked untouchable. I unlocked the phone. I scrolled to the contact I had saved simply as EC. I pressed the green button. It rang once. "Cole," the voice answered instantly. Background noise, wind, a car engine idling. "It is time," I said. My voice was steady, cold as the lake water. "He just did it. He announced the sale and the nursing home. He claimed full authority under the power of attorney in front of 70 witnesses. And he just evicted me." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Did he use the words?" Ethan asked. "He told me to pack my bags," I said. "He told me my free ride was over." "Beautiful," Ethan said. "We are right around the corner. Dr. Rivera is with me. Patricia Vance is in the car behind us, and we have a sheriff's deputy." "Come in through the front," I said. "I will be waiting." 10 minutes, Ethan said. "Hold the line. Reagan?" I lowered the phone. I did not hang up. I stood there in the dark, clutching the device like a detonator. Inside the house, my brother was probably pouring another drink, thinking he had just cleared the board. He thought he had removed the only obstacle in his path. He had no idea that by kicking me out, he had just invited the wrecking ball in. I turned the brass knob and pushed the heavy oak door open. The cold air from the lake followed me inside, a sharp draft that cut through the stifling heat of the party. I walked down the hallway, the heels of my shoes clicking against the hardwood with a rhythm that sounded like a gavel striking a bench. The dining room was in chaos. The polite silence I had left behind had shattered. Uncle Mark was standing now. His face flushed a deep, dangerous crimson. He was leaning over the table, his finger pointed squarely at Blake's chest. "You are talking about a man who taught you how to ride a bike," Mark was shouting, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and grief. "You are talking about putting him in a warehouse for the dying just so you can cash a check. It is an abuse of power. Blake, it is a betrayal of your own blood." Blake did not look ashamed. He looked annoyed. He slammed his hand down on the table, making the crystal wine glasses jump and ring. He grabbed the leather folio of documents he had been keeping near his plate and waved them in the air like a weapon. "It is not betrayal. It is the law," Blake roared back. "I have the papers. They are signed, notarized, and filed. Dad is not competent to live alone. Look at him. He does not even know what year it is. This is my right as his power of attorney. I am making the executive decision because no one else here has the stomach to do it." The room was frozen. Mrs. Gable was clutching her pearls. Professor Henderson looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Jenna was weeping silently into her napkin, while her husband Evan stared at his shoes. I stepped into the archway. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "You are sure you want to say that, Blake?" I asked. My voice cut through the noise like a razor wire. Blake spun around. He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and irritation, clearly surprised that I had not dissolved into the ether as instructed. "I asked if you are sure," I repeated, walking slowly toward the table. Do you really want to claim full legal authority and declare Dad incompetent in front of 70 witnesses? Because once you say it on the record, you cannot take it back. Blake sneered, straightening his jacket. Go pack your bags. Reagan, the adults are talking. The doorbell rang. It was not a polite, social ring. It was a long, insistent press that demanded to be answered. Blake frowned. Who is that? I will get it, I said calmly. Since I have not left yet, I suppose I still live here. I turned on my heel and walked to the front door. I opened it wide. Ethan Cole stood there, looking grim and ready for war. He was carrying a thick leather briefcase. Next to him was Dr. Lila Rivera, wearing her white coat, holding a medical file. Behind them stood Patricia Vance, the investigator from the state office, and a uniformed sheriff's deputy with his hand resting on his belt. Please, come in, I said. I led the procession into the dining room. The sound of heavy boots and hard-soled shoes on the floor made everyone turn. When the guests saw the police officer, a collective gasp went through the room. Blake's face went from red to a chalky white. He dropped the papers he was holding. What is this? Blake stammered, his voice cracking. Who allowed you to call the police to my father's house? Reagan called us, Ethan said, his voice deep and gravelly. He walked past me and placed his briefcase on the dining table, right next to the birthday cake, and Leonard Fox allowed it, in writing. That is a lie, Blake shouted, finding his bravado again. Dad is incompetent. He cannot authorize anything. I have the power of attorney. I am the only one who can authorize entry here. Not anymore, Ethan said. He clicked the latches of his briefcase. The sound was loud in the silent room. He opened the lid and pulled out a stack of files. He did not look at Blake. He looked at the guests. He looked at the witnesses. My name is Ethan Cole, he announced to the room. I am an attorney representing Leonard Fox, and I am here to present evidence of elder abuse, financial fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Sabrina, who had been standing near Dad's chair, suddenly looked like she was going to be sick. She took a step back, her hand going to her throat. This is ridiculous, Sabrina hissed. This is a private party. You are ruining Leo's birthday. We are saving his life, Dr. Rivera said sharply. Dr. Rivera stepped forward. She placed a medical file on the table. She looked at the guests, speaking clearly and simply. I am Dr. Lila Rivera, a board-certified geriatric specialist. I examined Leonard Fox 4 days ago. I also ran a toxicology panel on his blood. She opened the file and held up a chart. Leonard Fox does not have advanced dementia. She stated, he has mild cognitive decline consistent with his age. However, for the past 6 months, he has been systematically dosed with alprazolam, Xanax, and other sedatives that were never prescribed by his cardiologist. A murmur of horror rippled through the room. The confusion you see today? Dr. Rivera continued, pointing at Dad, who was blinking, trying to focus on her voice. The lethargy? The memory loss? Those are not natural symptoms. Those are side effects of a chemical-induced coma. Someone has been keeping him drugged to mimic the appearance of incapacity. Sabrina lunged forward. That is a lie. I give him his heart medication. That is all. Ethan did not argue. He simply pulled a laptop out of his bag. He set it on the table and turned the screen so the entire room could see it. He connected it to a small portable projector he had brought, aiming the beam at the blank cream-colored wall above the buffet table. Let us look at the tape, Ethan said. He hit the spacebar. The video was crystal clear. It showed our kitchen, bathed in the warm under-cabinet lighting. The timestamp in the corner read, Tuesday, 7:14 p.m. On the wall, 10 feet tall, Sabrina stood at the kitchen island. The guests watched in stunned silence as she pulled the unlabeled white bottle from her pocket. They watched her crush the blue pills with the back of a spoon. They watched her dump the powder into Dad's tea. But it was the audio that destroyed her. If we keep waiting, the lawyers are going to sniff this out. The Sabrina on the screen muttered, This is taking too long. Everything is going to get messy if he does not stay under. Then, on the screen, she turned and walked toward the living room. But before she left the frame, The video cut to a different angle, the camera in the living room. Sabrina handed the cup to Dad. He took it with shaking hands. He tried to stand up to adjust his pillow. He was slow. He stumbled slightly. On the screen, Sabrina shoved him. It was not a gentle guidance. It was a hard, impatient push to his chest that sent him sprawling back into the chair. "Sit down, old man." The recording played. "You are useless." The room in the present day erupted. Mrs. Gable let out a cry of shock. Professor Henderson stood up, knocking his chair over. Sabrina screamed, "That is illegal! You cannot record me! That is a violation of my privacy!" Ethan paused the video on the frame of her hand pushing Dad's chest. "Michigan is a one-party consent state for audio," Ethan said calmly. "And regarding the video, the courts have ruled that there is no expectation of privacy in the common areas of a home when there is a credible suspicion of abuse against a vulnerable adult." The cameras were placed by Reagan Fox, a legal resident of the property, to protect her father. It is entirely admissible. Sabrina looked at Blake, her eyes wide with panic. Blake was staring at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "But we are not done," Ethan said. He closed the video player and opened a document viewer. "Abuse is ugly," Ethan said, "but the motive is usually money, always money." He clicked a file. A scanned email appeared on the wall. The font was large enough for everyone to read. "This is an email sent 18 months ago," Ethan explained, "from Blake Fox to Sabrina Hale. This was 6 months before Sabrina supposedly met Leonard Fox by accident at a support group. I watched the guests read the text. I watched the realization wash over them like a cold wave. Subject: Target profile: Lakeside Ridge. Content: I found the perfect candidate. Leonard Fox, 68, widower, lives alone in a debt-free property. Valuation is roughly $1.5 million. He is soft, lonely, and trusting. The daughter is a non-factor. Work your magic." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of people realizing they were standing in the presence of monsters. Ethan clicked to the next slide. It was a photo. A selfie of Blake and Sabrina in a hotel bed, smiling, holding champagne glasses. The date stamp was from 3 months ago, 2 months after Sabrina married Dad. The caption underneath, written by Blake, read, "Almost at the finish line. Baby. Just a few more signatures and the old man is history." Jenna let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. She stood up, her hands trembling violently. "You knew her?" Jenna shouted at Blake. "You knew her before? You set this up?" Blake did not answer. He was staring at the wall, watching his life disintegrate pixel by pixel. Ethan kept reading, his voice relentless. "Here's an email from last week," Ethan said, "from Sabrina to Blake. The daughter is getting suspicious. She watches me. We need to move fast." From Blake to Sabrina, "Don't worry about Reagan. She is weak. She is a loser. I will humiliate her at the party. I will kick her out publicly, and she will be too broken to fight back. We sell the land as a teardown and split the cash." Ethan turned off the projector. The sudden absence of light left the room feeling darker, colder. He picked up the financial file. "And finally," Ethan said, holding up a stack of bank statements, "we have tracked $75,000 in unauthorized transfers from Leonard Fox's accounts to a shell company called BF Strategic Holdings. The registered agent for that company is Blake Fox." Ethan dropped the file on the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "You did not just want to sell the house, Blake," Ethan said, looking directly at my brother. "You were robbing him a piece at a time. You were poisoning him to keep him quiet. And you used your lover to do it while she pretended to be his wife." Sabrina crumbled. It was instantaneous. She looked at the police officer, then at the investigator, and the reality of the situation crushed her. "It was his idea," Sabrina shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Blake. She was crying now. Ugly, terrified tears. "He told me he would leave his wife. He told me we would take the money and go to Costa Rica. He made me give him the pills. He said it was the only way to get the signature. Caroline, Blake's wife, who had been standing quietly near the buffet table this whole time, walked forward. Her face was colorless. She looked at the photo on the screen, the one of her husband in bed with his stepmother. She walked up to Blake. She did not scream. She simply looked at him with a disgust so profound it looked like she was smelling rotting meat. "Costa Rica?" Caroline asked softly. Blake reached out for her. "Caroline, honey, listen. It is not what it looks like. These are deep fakes. It is AI. Reagan made them." Caroline slapped him. It was a sound like a gunshot. Hard, clean, final. She turned to me. She did not say a word. She just nodded. Once, a gesture of apology and respect. Then she picked up her purse and walked out the front door without looking back. Blake touched his cheek, stunned. He looked around the room, desperate for an ally. He looked at Miles Rowan, the real estate agent. Miles held up his hands, backing away toward the door. "I did not know about the drugs. Blake, I just appraise houses. I am out of here." Miles bolted. Blake turned to Dad. Dad was sitting up straighter now. The commotion, the noise, the shock. It had pierced through the sedation. He was looking at the wall where the emails had been projected. He was looking at the son he had raised. "Dad," Blake pleaded, his voice taking on a desperate, wheedling tone. "Dad, you know me. I am your son. I was trying to help. I was trying to protect your assets. Reagan is twisting everything. She is jealous." Dad stood up. It was a struggle. His legs were weak from weeks of atrophy and drugs, but he gripped the edge of the table and pushed himself up. I moved to help him, but he held up a hand. He wanted to do this alone. He stood there, swaying slightly, looking at Blake. "You called my daughter a loser," Dad said. His voice was raspy, but it was loud enough to be heard. "Dad, please," Blake begged. "You told 70 people she was a leech," Dad continued, his voice gaining strength. "You tried to throw her out of the house she has scrubbed and repaired for 3 years. Dad looked at me. His eyes were wet, but they were clear. "She is not the loser. Blake," Dad said, "she is the only reason I'm still alive." He turned back to Blake. He looked at the man in the expensive suit, the man who had viewed him as an inventory item. "Get out," Dad said. "Dad, you can't," Blake started. "I said get out," Dad roared. It was the voice of the professor, the voice of the father, the voice of a man reclaiming his dignity. "This is my house, and you are no longer welcome in it." Blake looked at the sheriff's deputy. The deputy stepped forward, his hand resting on his handcuffs. "Mr. Fox," the deputy said to Blake. "Ms. Hale, I think we need to go down to the station. Investigator Vance has some questions for you regarding elder abuse and grand larceny." Blake looked at me then, for the first time all night. He really looked at me. He saw the black dress. He saw the calm face. He saw the phone in my hand. "You did this," he whispered. "You planned this." I walked up to him. I stood close enough that I could smell the fear sweating through his expensive cologne. I leaned in, so only he could hear me. I packed my bags. "Blake," I whispered, "just like you asked. But I made sure I packed yours, too." The deputy took Blake by the arm. Another officer who had entered quietly took Sabrina. As they were led out of the dining room, past the stunned guests, past the birthday cake that would never be cut, the silence was broken only by Sabrina's sobbing and the heavy tread of Justice walking out the door. I stood next to Dad. I put my arm around him to steady him. He leaned his weight against me, heavy and warm. I looked at the room. The party was over. The illusion was gone. The house was messy, filled with strangers and police and the debris of a shattered family. But as I looked at Mark, who was wiping his eyes, and at Ethan, who was closing his briefcase with a satisfied snap, I knew one thing for sure. The house was ours again, and the free ride was definitely over. The room was spinning, but for the first time in months, I was standing on solid ground. The guests were murmuring. a low tide of shock and judgment washing over the dining table. But Ethan Cole was not finished. He reached into his briefcase one last time and pulled out a second set of documents. These were fresh, crisp, and bore a signature that was steady and deliberate. He slid them across the mahogany table toward Blake. "This is a durable medical and financial power of attorney," Ethan announced, his voice filling the room. It was signed by Leonard Fox 4 days ago, in the presence of Dr. Rivera, who has sworn under oath that he was fully lucid, unmedicated, and competent at the time of signing. It revokes all previous authorities. It names Reagan Fox and Mark Fox as the sole decision-makers for his estate. Blake stared at the document, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the paper. "This is impossible," Blake stammered. "I have the master copy. I have the full authority. It was notarized." "The paper you have was signed while Leonard was under the influence of a high-grade narcotic that was administered to him without a prescription and with malicious intent." Ethan replied cold. "In the eyes of the law, that is not a contract. That is evidence of coercion. It is not just void, Blake. It is a confession." Blake looked around the room, searching for an exit, searching for a friendly face, but the walls were closing in. Patricia Vance, the investigator, stepped forward. She held a thick file folder. "We also have the forensic accounting report," she stated. "We have tracked the transfers. $75,000 has been moved from Leonard's retirement accounts into BF Strategic Holdings over the last 6 months. She looked directly at Sabrina. "We know you initiated the transfers using his iPad, Ms. Hale, and we know Blake Fox is the sole signatory on the receiving account. That is grand larceny and wire fraud." The pressure in the room finally found its release valve. Sabrina broke. She did not just crack, she shattered. The composed, elegant stepmother dissolved into a terrified, cornered animal. "It was him!" Sabrina screamed, her voice shrill and ugly. She pointed a trembling finger at Blake. "It was all his idea. He told me what to do. He told me to give him the pills. He said if I kept him confused, we could get the signature and sell the house before anyone noticed." She turned to the police officer, begging. "He promised me money," she sobbed. "He said he was going to leave his wife. He said we would take the cash and go to Costa Rica. I just did what he told me." The silence that followed that admission was heavy enough to crush a lung. Caroline, Blake's wife, stood frozen near the buffet table. She had been silent until now, paralyzed by the unfolding nightmare. But hearing this, she walked forward. Her face was deadly pale. She looked at Blake. She looked at Sabrina. "How long?" Caroline asked. Her voice was a whisper, but it cut deeper than any scream. "You were sleeping with her? While you were pretending to take care of your father?" Ethan did not need to say a word. He simply reached into the file and slid a few more printed emails across the table toward Caroline. They were graphic. They were intimate. They were undeniable proof of a long, sordid affair carried out in the shadow of my father's illness. Caroline looked at the pages, then closed her eyes. She took off her wedding ring and dropped it into a glass of champagne. The clink was the final punctuation mark on Blake's marriage. Then, a sound came from the head of the table, a chair scraping against the wood. Dad stood up. He was swaying slightly, the drugs still fighting a war in his blood, but his eyes were burning with a clarity I had not seen in a year. He looked at the chaos. He looked at the son who had sold him out. He looked at the woman who had poisoned him. "Enough," Dad said. His voice was not loud, but it stopped the room. "This is my house," Dad said, enunciating every word. "I built this life. I raised this family. And you do not have the right to come in here and tell me how to end it." He looked at Blake with a mixture of profound disappointment and steely resolve. "You tried to throw Reagan out," Dad said. "You called her a failure, but she is the one who saved me. You do not have the right to touch her. You do not have the right to touch this house." Ethan nodded and stepped forward for the final revelation. "Actually, Leonard," Ethan said gently, "even if Blake had a valid power of attorney, he never had the right to sell this house." Ethan turned to the room. holding up one last, yellowed document. It looked old, fragile, covered in elegant cursive writing. "This is the deed to the property," Ethan explained. "But more importantly, this is the trust agreement attached to it. It was established 40 years ago by Reagan's maternal grandmother. She was a shrewd woman. She set up the Lakeshore Family Trust." Ethan looked at Blake, who was now slumped in a chair, defeated. "The trust has a specific clause," Ethan said. "It states that in the event of any proposed sale or transfer of the primary residence while a direct descendant is living there, the transaction requires the written consent of the resident beneficiary." Ethan pointed at me. "That beneficiary is Reagan Fox." The room gasped. I stared at Ethan, stunned. I had never known. Mark stepped up, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Your mom knew, Reagan," Mark said softly. "She knew you were the one who always cared about this place. She wanted to make sure that no matter what happened, you always had a shield. She and your grandmother locked it down years ago." Ethan looked at Blake. "So you see, Blake," Ethan said, "you were fighting a war you had lost before you were even born. You could never have sold this house without Reagan's signature. All of this, the drugs, the lies, the theft, it was all for nothing." The sheriff's deputy stepped forward. The handcuffs clicked, a harsh, metallic sound that signaled the end of the party. "Blake Fox, Sabrina Hale," the deputy announced, "you are under arrest for elder abuse, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent." Sabrina began to wail as the officer took her arm. She was led out, stumbling in her expensive heels, mascara running down her face in black streaks. Blake did not cry. He looked numb. He looked like a man who had woken up in a nightmare he could not talk his way out of. The deputy pulled him toward the door. As he passed me, Blake stopped. He looked at the tote bag still sitting by the door, the bag he had told me to pack. He looked at my face. "You will pay for this," he hissed, his voice trembling with impotent rage. "You destroyed this family." I looked him in the eye. I did not feel fear. I did not feel sadness. I felt the clean, cool relief of the truth. "I did not destroy anything, Blake," I said quietly. "I just turned on the lights. You signed your own sentence tonight. All I did was make the call." The deputy pushed him forward. The heavy oak door closed behind them, shutting out the cold night and the criminals we had lived with. The room was quiet. The guests were gone, escorted out by the police or leaving in hushed embarrassment. Miles Rowan had vanished. Caroline had left in a separate cab. It was just us now. Me, Dad, Mark, and Jenna, who was sitting in the corner, sobbing quietly into her hands, realizing how close she had come to being an accomplice by her own silence. Dad sat back down in his chair. He looked exhausted, but he looked free. He reached out his hand. I took it. Mark took the other. "We are okay," Dad whispered, closing his eyes. "We are home." And for the first time in 3 years, I knew he was right. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below with your location so we can connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.